Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about minimalism. We're going to talk about how to write better code by writing less code. Maybe no code? I don't know. That might be a thing too. We'll find out. Let's say hi to our panelists, then we'll meet our guest, and then we'll get into the content. Joining us today, we got Alyssa. Alyssa, what's going on?
Oh, not much. Just so excited to be here. I think the topic's really exciting. So,
I agree. Mike's with us. Mike, what's going on? Is that Mike? I can't tell if that's Mike.
It is me. I'm going to go with the
Something-
minimalist intro. Hi.
Very nice. Very practicing your minimalism, right?
I'm trying.
Yeah. All right. Cool. And our guest today, Doguhan, is joining us. How's it going?
Pretty good. How about you?
Doing good. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Do you want to fill in our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Doguhan Uluca, and I hail from the greater Washington, D.C. Metro area. I'm an Angular GDE, and I do work in the federal, nonprofit, and private spaces. So a lot of different amalgamation of experiences there in my career. I work for a great consulting firm, Excella. We are hiring, open for remote positions, so do look us up. And yeah, outside of that, I enjoy building Lego, playing, Pac-Man, recording music and stuff, and also I'm an avid mixologist as well.
are you on Spotify? I have to ask.
I am on SoundCloud. I'll say it's the solar system dust. If you wanna.
I'm like right now looking it up right now.
Right.
So excited about this news. Okay.
Alyssa, you need to pay attention, though. Focus.
What? No, yeah, I'm totally not Googling. What?
Okay, cool.
System dust.
And a mixologist, huh?
Yeah. I love. I mean, in general, like I'm not a cook per se, but I feel like I'm pretty good at following instructions, behind the box, and nailing it. So yeah, my wife bought me this awesome the bar book, which kind of covers like the history of why certain drinks, why different kinds of drinks exist, and how to properly the etiquette of drinking them and all that stuff. So I really enjoy kind of just following the instructions and mixing stuff and using these fancy glasses that break all the time to serve them and have a bit of a moment.
We're actually going to need to cancel this episode today. We need to reschedule so that we can do this in person.
Mhm. I know, right?
Yes,
We can take
we'll be happy
advantage of these skills that you've acquired.
I feel
Yes.
so glad that
My-
Justin had you elaborate because I thought you meant sound mix.
Oh, okay.
Like a DJ. I didn't realize it was beverages. I'm on board.
I do mix my own songs as well, though.
Okay.
So what's your go-to drink that's in your wheelhouse that you just knock out of the park every time you make it? Do you have one?
Yeah, it's my old fashioned. Is dare I say legendary in my circle. Admittedly,
All right, nice.
It's not a very large circle, but people love it.
So do you have the ability to make the ice cube, like the legit ice cube?
Yes.
All right.
An old fashioned is not an old fashioned in this decade without a round ice cube.
Nice. All right.
All right. The cube ones are supremely tough to nail. Yeah. So the round ones are easier.
Nice. Now, I guess the real question is, do you have the ability to make a round one that looks like the Death Star? Have you seen those?
No, I haven't, but I'm sure there are molds out there. Yeah.
All right.
But I also feel
like Mike
like
said,
the illusion would only last for like a minute before it melts away. So.
As with any good art, right?
That's true. It's about the moment, right? For sure. All right,
Sure.
well, let's dive into the topic. So minimalism. What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So if I may, this is the best catchphrase of the COVID era. If I may share my screen.
Nice,
I
nice.
wanna,
Yes,
I
for
wanna,
sure. Let's do this.
I want to show a graphic. I'm a very visual storyteller. All right, and let's do that. Let's do that. All right. I hope you all can see my screen here. So I gave this talk at the Angular North America meetup a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a week ago. And by the way, this is Excella.com/careers if you're interested. So yeah, so there's this comic from a few years back. It's about kind of at the time just kind of making fun of the fact that JavaScript, every solution becomes some kind of a library, but then like the more you kind of get into it, it gets you become kind of like Inception level 4, and then you realize you're just digging deeper and deeper and deeper trying to solve some problem, but once you stop to think and realize, is the point, we thought we were trying to avoid these, deep, holes that we dig ourselves into by using, open source JavaScript tools and all that stuff. So I find it very useful to kind of step away from that, because these are all sandbags of complexity that makes your life miserable over time. And then there's this video of the monk, just able to bare feet, climb this super steep hill, whereas the other person is using like super sophisticated tools. To be able to achieve the same feat, and of course, as you see, as the monk is just kind of going up the hill, the other person is just like what am I doing with my life, right? So basically this gives me a pause in, whenever I find myself, trying to not solve the problem that's ultimately going to deliver that impact to your client or your user base, but you're solving some other problem or someone else's problem, and this can lead to quite a good amount of frustration, and ultimately, over years of, if you're working on the same project over years and you keep piling complexity upon complexity on complexity, the mental kind of load that this creates on engineers becomes way too much. I'm sure you all know that feeling when you announce that you're kind of you're leaving your current position to join another company. You instantly start smiling, and that smiling is like generated by the fact that, oh my God, all this baggage that I've been carrying with me all these years, I get to leave them behind, and I get a fresh start. So how do we end that cycle? How do we kind of get to a state where our daily jobs, daily lives are just manageable, and we proactively avoid getting into the situation? Because also there's a perspective of you as a developer, going through your career, from junior to senior and all that stuff, and then there is the leadership aspect of it. Once you become a team lead or an architect or something like that, then by kind of making the wrong decisions, and the word wrong is a very loaded term there, but I won't get into that. But making the wrong kind of decisions, you can inadvertently reflect so much pain to the people working in your team. And this could result in overtime. This could result in crunch and all that stuff. And for me, that kind of I define success as a leader if everyone can get their stuff done within that 40 hours, and everyone goes to home, or everyone can get off their leave their desks at home happy, and they're not riddled by all these issues and problems that they have to overcome. So that's kind of the gist of it.
There's so many hidden costs there too, right? It's not just about looking at that particular thing and seeing the complexity at that given moment that you're creating it, but there's all these things like having to come back to it later, even if you're the one that wrote it, and have to relearn when you come back 6 months later, right? And you're like, what is this doing again? I got to wrap my head around it, like all those things. Yeah. And like you said, the baggage that carries along, it's like the more complex those things are, the harder it is for our minds to just leave work and release it. You kind of keep thinking about those things.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, there are several ways to deal with this. One is the technology side. So I wrote this, the second edition of my book, Angular for Enterprise Ready Web Applications. It's a mouthful. Is 900 pages, and it destroyed me to kind of put that together, because I realized it's so difficult to tell a story. How do you take a hello world, all the way to a professional deployment, on AWS with all the high availability and maintainability and continuous integration, and keep being able to add features, and not just as a single developer. What if you grow to 4 developers, and then next thing you know it, you're 20 developers. How do you kind of keep this going without everything collapsing in and of itself? So telling that consistent story is so like 900 pages. It's like 300 blog posts, right? But the thing is, if you're blogging 300 blog posts, your blog number 1 and your blog number 300, you're likely going to be using wildly different coding styles and different technologies and stuff like that. So it's you're basically cheating in a sense. Whereas I really tried to keep it consistent from that perspective. And one of the key factors in making that possible was just sticking to the absolute fundamentals. So like working with Angular, for example, sticking to the platform defaults and the fundamental concepts as much as possible, and then applying things like object-oriented programming principles like abstract classes, inheritance, interfaces, to make your code more reusable, extensible, and all that stuff. Avoiding shooting yourself in the foot by introducing properties all over the place that introduce state, and also just leveraging TypeScript features where you can just create a file and export functions. Not everything has to be a service, right? So if you and also thinking twice, thrice, and quad something amount of times before introducing tools like NGRX, right? It's a fantastic way of state management, but you really got to think about, hey, is it appropriate for this particular module of the application? Because it is, you might not realize it, but you might be, bringing, a tank to a water gun fight, right? Without realizing it.
But you're guaranteeing yourself a win.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yes, a win in terms of job security, that's for sure.
Yes.
One of the things you mentioned earlier about you start off with maybe you and then maybe 4 developers and maybe 20 developers. I think that's one of those key aspects that are important when we talk about architecture and developing code. It plays an aspect to that, right? We need to think about the impact of the way we write our code and how we approach it, of the number of people we have on a team, how everybody has to work together, and all those sort of things, right? That's another variable in the equation to really think about what approach we should take, right? And I always say the beauty of doing development is that it's kind of an open canvas, and you can create and deploy and ship working software in so many different ways, right? It's about how do you effectively choose the way that's going to work for the situation that you're in, from the requirements, like you mentioned, from what the business needs, but also what's the team, what's the dynamic there, all those things, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And also we often find ourselves also victims of whatever management philosophy is surrounding us at the time. If you think about Scrum or Kanban and all these things that needs to be done, and I've been lucky enough to attend and speak at some agile conferences, and had a chance to kind of speak to some of the signatories to the Agile Manifesto, one-on-one. And one of the things that they talk about is forget about this, the agile industrial complex that aims to certify everyone and push all these Scrum Masters out there, or what have you. It's really up to us, the engineers, to deliver working code, and above and beyond anything and everything else, we just need to focus on delivering working code, and not necessarily be limited by the whatever sprint ceremony that we need to adhere to. And that's a mindset that everyone on the team would need to have. That's a cultural thing, and really shift focus away from the process as the the word that must be adhered to, but focusing on instead really those engineering principles, writing unit testable code, and refactoring and refactoring all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's like the crux of it, though, because it gets so overwhelming at times to think, how am I going to architect this in the absolute best way, and what pieces are going to live forever, and how do I put this together in the right way? And I think it can be almost paralyzing. And so I think that's why, as developers, we get into these messes, because at some point you just have to move, right? Make a decision. And then you look back, and hindsight's everything, right? You're like, whoops, the wrong decision. But so I think that's something I'm really anxious to learn, if you have any tips on, is how to make those decisions while also not getting paralyzed, because there's just so many times where you don't have the luxury of time, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And so one of my great mentors, Fadi Stefan, I got a lot of agile engineering best practices from him. Even taught a couple of like TypeScript focus certified Scrum developer courses with them, which was quite educational in terms of organizing my thoughts around all those issues. And so in test-driven development, right, the goal is to write the test first, and then only write enough code to make the test pass, and then kind of rinse and repeat. And this forces you to one, write decoupled and modular code, but also forces you to write the minimal amount of code to actually deliver that feature. And it also teaches you that to not necessarily think about solution holistically, from the get-go, because you can actually stub out a lot of the code and pretend that it exists, right? So you might be thinking about some overwhelming task with 5 subtasks that needs to happen, but usually there's some algorithm there that's controlling those 5 really complicated things. And you can first sit back and create 5 functions. This is this complicated thing, and that one function can end up becoming its entire system with a million lines of code behind it. But what's the interface to it is going to. So you also start thinking about the developer experience there as well. Okay, these are the inputs, that makes sense, and this is the output I'm expecting from it. And then just initially just focus on that general algorithm of how is this going to work. And I find that's a good way to kind of divide and conquer using those stubs. And another benefit to creating stubs, and so in my book I also talk about router first architecture, as it's a term that I coined. It's basically first go ahead and lay out your Angular or React application with all the navigational elements. Even go as far as plopping in just hand-drawn designs into the HTML page as a placeholder, because creating these stubs and placeholders really allows multiple developers to start working multiple parts of the application at the same time, but also simultaneously it also gives the business people in a kind of a preview of, hey, this is what it's going to look like. If we're going to make some drastic changes, let's do it now before it's too late. And also from a development perspective, we avoid that problem of, look, I've been developing this for a month, and I've been developing this for a month. Now let's bring it together. So it avoids those integration challenges as well. So basically, divide and conquer, stub things out, create the placeholders. Those are kind of the techniques that I recommend to overcome that feeling of being overwhelmed by the task at hand.
Yeah, that type of idea of the route-based approach I really like, because it allows the core team, the initial team, to set up that type of foundation, and then you have an orders route, you have a customer route, you have a Justin route. You get your own route, buddy. But then you have all that foundation. You have a component or a module that it routes to, and what it then allows you to do is delegate out to different teams and different people, and that scales well to allow all those people to start working on those individual pieces with a minimal foundation.
What's a really good point of is that the power of test-driven development, right? And not only just doing test-driven development, but the mindset that you learn from doing it, right? Because really what you talk about is even your router-based thing is the same concept, right? You're thinking, I need something, I want it, this is what I'm going to have it do. I need to develop and understand the API of how I want to use it, and then I'll go back and fill in the guts of it to make it work, right? And one of the examples I use for how powerful that is if you think about what we want to do as humans, as developers, is like we start solving things we get one thing, we start solving it automatically for other things. And a good example is like an address, right? When we talk about an address, maybe our request is to say, let's have address line 1, city, state, zip, right? And that's the business requirement. Our mind immediately goes to, oh, there's addresses that have line 2, or maybe they have an apartment, or maybe they have another thing. And so we mentally start building that out. And that's that complexity that we get into that's not meeting the needs of the business, and we're extending it and making it too complex, right? And so if you write that TDD and you say, look, I just need to fulfill this, it has to have one address line, boom. Then all I need to do is write the code for that. And you immediately start seeing, like I start visually seeing, my mind is making this too complex because now I'm out of scope, right? And so I think
exactly,
that
so I'll say in practice, doing TDD, like properly doing TDD, like literally writing the test first and then the code, later, really only makes sense in where like complicated business logic is involved, which is, to be honest, doesn't happen. It doesn't come across very often. But like you said, Justin, the biggest thing that you take away from is then writing unit testable code, right? So I don't want to set unrealistic expectations on anyone, and I don't want to pretend that I sit down and write TDD all the time. No, I only do TDD when some really complicated business logic is staring at me in the face, and I'm like, okay, if I don't get my test cases in first, this algorithm is going to be wrong, all sorts of ways.
Yeah. But I think the idea of stubbing things out is hugely powerful to be able to move forward quickly. I do that typically as I'm working in an Angular application at 3 different levels. I'll typically start with the template of a component, and any calls or properties that I need, I'll just stub them out. I'll have empty functions. I'll have nullable properties that have no types or anything else within there or anything. And then as I go through and try to add the functionality to the template is when I'll start to fill that in.
Do you often find yourself having to add like more types that you didn't think about, or do you usually think of them like right away? Like what exactly you'll need?
Typically, I don't think about types at all when I'm defining a template. That I'll just have, all right, I need to have a name, or for the idea of like an address component, I'll just go in there and I'll create the different inputs and labels for address, city, state, zip, no address to, or apartment number, just minimal, and have that there. And then maybe I'll have the ability to track the changes, or whatever, or save, or if there's a save button or anything else, to add the event handler for that then, and then later on go back and fill that in. And then with a lot of components, maybe not with an address, but there's going to be services that you talk to. And I can't tell you how many services that I've created and gone back to and like, oh, I need to do this, that are HTTP call functions, or functions that should be making the HTTP call, that are just have of foo or of an array that are just sitting there so that I can move forward without having to worry about any other dependencies. I don't have to worry about, did the backend team finish creating that API yet or anything else? I have that sitting there to be able to use until it's ready for me to consume whatever they have available to me. So the idea of, it's very similar to a TDD approach, except for the fact that it's just adding the minimal pieces that you need, but at a layer level. And then it goes from the template to the component to the service or underlying functionality, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and another aspect of that is also using. So we talked. Let's say you mentioned types, right? And TypeScript gives us the opportunity to create interfaces. So one of the cornerstones of kind of writing, solid code, the code that adheres to the solid principles, is the idea of passing abstractions and not concretions. So like between components, you shouldn't be passing concrete objects of things. So if you're newing up an object, the scope of that object should be as limited as possible. So in your function, declarations or whatever, your input or your output should always be an interface. So if you're passing something that adheres to an interface, you can consume it. And in the example of at the service layer, this creates a great opportunity. You can write an interface of what you think the backend team is going to deliver to you, right? And by the way, that also doesn't have to be complete. So like in my book, I was writing something against the open weather map API or whatever, and oh my god, this API has like 50 plus properties, but I really need to pluck out like 4 or 5 things out of it. And it also has a pretty complex like relational structure within it as well. So I just went in there and created a kind of an interface that replicated the structure of it, but only defines like the 5 or 6 properties that I'm interested in. And then I can just write a quick transform function within the service that can transform that complicated structure into a flat thing that then I can pass into my consume in my component. So that way, none of that complexity seeps into into my template code or my component code or anything like that. And then if I want to write unit tests against this stuff, I can bring in these outside API structure and still be able to unit test with it, because I have the conceptual stub of it or the definition of it, and I don't have to worry about the real thing there. So interfaces are really, really powerful.
One of the cool things about TypeScript that's amazing, that really helps with the minimalist approach, I think, that maybe doesn't get leveraged as often or isn't as realized as often, is that you get inferred types, right? So when you talk about like this call to the service down low that hits the HTTP call and builds your model and gets it all ready and returns it back through, that interface that you write, you don't necessarily need to import that interface into your component and use it. If you're calling that, TypeScript will infer that and can get that type safety for you. So you can get type safety that we get from TypeScript without having to chuck around all these models, because I'm sure, as we all know, like when you get into enterprise level development, and you're sharing code across different places, but keeping it decoupled, it's one of the biggest challenges. So lean on that type inference that TypeScript provides us to, simplify a lot of things as well.
Yeah, that's a mindset shift. I used to be a type chucker myself. I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there.
I just want a T-shirt. Like, I'm a type chucker, like.
Yeah, you're just throwing them all over the place. Like, then your component goes from having like, I don't know, your 5, 6, 7, whatever imports at the top to having like 15, 20, 30. But by minimizing that, by utilizing the tool to its abilities, then you don't have to be as explicit about that. So I want to throw a little bit of a wrench into this whole discussion. All of the techniques and ideas and philosophies that we've talked about are amazing when it comes to doing new development, but we don't always have the ability to write everything new or fresh. We jump into projects that are already existing, that have existed for a week, a month, a year, multiple years, decades, that have been sitting around for quite a while, that have a lot of legacy code that may not be following these types of practices. So I'm curious what everybody thinks about how to apply these types of principles to existing, less ideal, more real world scenario applications. I'm going to mute and let everybody talk about that.
I didn't catch the very end of what you said, Mike. But yes, that wrench that you're throwing is bigger than a wrench.
I'm chucking types all over the place.
It's a yeah.
I mean, I was
Right.
thinking that same thing because I was like, okay, this sounds like great for if you're just getting started, but if you're in the middle of a project, I feel like you just go to your team and be like, you know what? We're doing TDD now. Deal with it. You know, like it's so
Yeah.
I feel like there's got to be maybe an incremental way to like pick and choose like what you can start to implement, what would be like the most useful for your time. There's got to be some way to start like seeping
Yeah.
it into your team. Like
So another great mentors of mine, Stephen Ritchie, he would give these like great examples of how to deal with stagnant or extremely unnecessarily complicated code bases. Let's just put it that way. And one of the ways to think about it is you have it's going to be a bit grim, but you have a car crash victim, right? You're rolling into the ICU. What's the first thing you do, right? You first got to stop the bleeding, right? You first got to stop the bleeding. So it's really important to identify those areas on those ginormous complicated code bases. First, how do we stop the bleeding, right? For example, if you're in a place where you're not able to execute any unit tests, or you don't have any review process or any automation, one way to stop the bleeding is okay, let's force everyone to adopt continuous integration. Let's enforce let's lock the main branch and let's enforce everything to go through PRs and peer reviews and things like that. So that's a great way to start a conversation. And you would not believe, and I'm sure all of you have seen this, is how much people resist to just enabling these
checks
and controls on developers. But then 6 months in,
never
then
had
everyone
to do that before.
and
know exactly
but
what you're
then
talking
a wonderful thing happens 6 months in. Then everyone's like, how on earth did we deliver any code without peer reviews and continuous integration and things like that? And that's the thing. These things take time, right? If you had a team working furiously for 3 years just throwing code at something, it's going to take almost as long to get to a better place, right? So yeah, you gotta first start the bleeding, and then you gotta decide, hey, do we have to amputate something, right? Like I said, it's gonna be a grim analogy here, and you gotta make that tough call of, okay, this part of the application perhaps needs to be just rewritten from scratch, right? And that's also not feasible all the time, but dividing and conquering.
I took it more like, oh, we have to amputate Mike off the team. He doesn't agree with test-driven development. Okay, he's gone now. But no, that makes
unfortunately, as organizations that are unable to prune their talent, can't keep thriving, right? Now we're shifting our attention from human patients to botany a little bit, but right, if your tree has a dead branch and if you don't prune it, you might just end up killing the whole tree. And unfortunately, we do sometimes work with individuals that they literally hurt other team members, right? In the they could just cause so much pain within the organization. So do everything possible to train, educate grow and all that stuff, and give every opportunity available and possible. But my cutoff period is about usually 2 years. I am a dedicated person. I do when I work with someone, I give them every opportunity possible. But beyond that, if things aren't improving, then that's an action that needs to be taken by by management.
The initial communication and messaging of what is being attempted and why it's being attempted is very important to get buy-in from an existing team. I mean, if it also talks about scale. How big is the application? Are you trying to get a team of 2 people on board? All right, well, that's pretty straightforward. However, if you're talking about a team of 40, 50, 100 developers, well, then your messaging and how it gets conveyed and explained and trained, or they get trained of how to do what you're trying to accomplish becomes much more important.
Yeah. And there can also be conflicting goals, right? There could be, it's like, hey, we got to keep pushing at full speed while we also want to improve also. And at that point, it's just, so long as everyone knows, what's going on, it is okay to intentionally deliver, I'm just going to say crappy code as a general term.
Different code.
We can go with technical debt. That's a pretty acceptable.
Suboptimal.
But and that's when these overall architectural competencies come into place. It is okay to deliver suboptimal or unpretty or or bad code, if it's isolated on its own, right? It's much easier to eject, an isolated module from your application, but it's much more difficult to rip out, code that's pervasive and touches everything. So that's why that and Alyssa, like you said, when we're discussing about existing projects and all that stuff, the thing is, if we just keep talking about this more and more often, I mean, eventually we will end up starting new projects, right? So let's at least make sure that the new projects we're starting are started correctly, and it does have those architectural elements. Then when inevitably, and then it is inevitable, bad code creeps into the code base, it is isolated, and it's possible to treat that problem.
But is it isolated because all of the code is isolated because of how we're writing, or is it isolated because we're really gonna isolate this chunk? Is it just because intentionally everything is?
I mean, so for example, just thinking about Angular once again, if you're doing everything in feature modules, right? Or if you're using NX and you have your libraries or what have you, and then if you empower every team to go ahead and work in your module, but then be a kind of a watchdog on the core of the app, like the app.module.ts and package.json, those should be policed like a police state, with extreme prejudice. It should be policed, because anything that's done there has an impact. But if you want to go crazy and import whatever you want into your feature module to resolve or solve whatever problem you want to solve, go ahead, go crazy, right? And some teams might end up getting themselves into trouble by importing too much stuff or some library that will eventually create more problems than it's worth. Whatever. So that's kind of what I mean, is creating those space, because we also don't want to control engineers, right? We need my analogy for that is there's a pathway, right? And as an architect or a team lead, our job is to put up handrails, to ensure people don't fall off. But if you keep that pathway very narrow, then you're going to end up frustrating everyone. If you keep it way too wide, then you're going to end up jeopardizing the entire solution. So you got to find that balance to give freedom to people so they can kind of experiment and express their own ideas and desires and all that stuff. But it is possible to have those guardrail in place that can then protect the rest of the application.
Yeah, and it's not, the solution to talking about like, do I come in and building a brand new thing, or do I have to take on something that's already there? It's the solution there is the same thing as we talk about refactoring. Even if we have some fancy thing that we built that we think is dialed in, right? Same thing goes when we need to refactor that and make parts of that simplified. It's the same type of approach. We're finding out how do we target and slow iteration and isolate and solve those problems and get to a path to success over time, right? And picking your battles and where you target.
Yeah. So one experience I had was, so we were tasked with creating a mobile application for an existing system, right? But I will not choose my words here carefully because the back end was just trash. Like it wasn't adhering to any kind of standard that ever existed. Like it was concocted, from the beautiful mind of a person who just had ideas and put things together. So writing a mobile app, directly to that API would have been possible, but it would have meant writing extremely bad code, in this new project that we're creating. So instead, the architectural decision there was, we're gonna write a proxy layer in between the old API and then create a new API that we can then code against. So keep our new code base, great, clean, maintainable, etc. And also, this proxy layer, that code doesn't have to be pretty or it doesn't have to be great. It can be suboptimal because its job is to really isolate, to the two different systems. And they had a plan to write a new API in the future. And then that proxy layer also becomes something that you can just eject in the future when the new API comes in. Because when the new API comes in, then you have a clean API to work against, and at best all you have to do is update your service layer code to make sure your new applications keep working. But you don't have to choose between quality and not quality against an existing code base. So it is possible to achieve this via creating proxy layers in the code base.
Yeah,
And that's
Lars
really
is-
that great.
Oh, you go, Justin.
I was going to say that's a great approach to how do we isolate stuff that we have already, right? You think about that mentality of isolation, that proxy approach gives that ability to isolate. And then, like you mentioned, from there, under the hood, beyond that proxy, we can do whatever we need to do over time to get that right or dialed in. But we're establishing a layer of our API that we want. And then you just keep pushing that further and further down the tree until you have so much throughout the entire thing the way you want it, and you've isolated further and further down until it's completely pushed out and gone.
Iframes, baby.
It's a possibility.
On your example, Lars was asking about the bad backend, if it was API design or actual code. I think what you were saying was API design, but maybe it was also
API design. Yeah, it was. it was abusing the RSS technology to act as an API instead of a feed, if that makes sense. So it was, it was just the completely bespoke solution that no one should code against.
God.
So
It's like exposing XML. Oh, no, thank you. Bad memories are happening.
You don't want to
in my
live in the
head.
soap world? You don't want to live in the soap world, Mike?
Justin, you're hurting
Envelopes.
Soap would have been great compared to what this was.
Yeah.
And so also on the, I just want to mention a quick story. So there's this great interview that came out on YouTube by the Everyday Astronaut with Elon Musk. It's like 2.5 hours long. So if you're into space things, it's a must watch. But there was a thing in there where Elon Musk talk about his 5 steps to getting things done. And I actually kind of like paused the video and went back and kind of transcribed it a little bit because I found it really interesting. This one example he gave was so I guess at the Tesla Model 3 factory when they were running into production issues. He was kind of sleeping at the factory and trying to really solve this problem where there was automated step that was trying to install an insulation layer between the battery pack and the rest of the car, at the bottom of the car. And then, he first tried to automate the problem, to speed it up. And then he tried to accelerate the cycle time so everything would happen faster. And then he tried to simplify and optimize the part, and then at some point he was like, okay, why do we need this? So he goes to the battery team and it's like, hey, what is this for? Is it for like fire protection or what is it? And they say, oh no, it's for acoustics. It's so to prevent the road noise getting into the car cabin. And then he goes to the kind of the team responsible for noise and vibrations and all that stuff. And he asked them, hey, what is this part for? And they said, it's a fireproofing layer. So it's like, well, wait a second. Well, why do we need this part? So then they ran a test with and without this part. And there was no discernible difference in noise level within the cabin. So they ended up deleting the part. So then he realized he was going about this problem, all backwards. So instead of automating, accelerating, simplifying, optimizing, and only to discover that the requirement itself is, dumb in his own words. He came out with this, first and foremost, make your requirements less dumb. I don't agree with this usage of the word dumb there, but make your requirements less complicated, maybe. I don't know, or less convoluted. And then try very hard to delete that part or process. In fact, he says if you're not occasionally 10% of the time adding back things into your code base or your process, you're not deleting hard enough. If you're keeping things around, keeping things around just in case you need it, you're adding to the pile. So try to delete that part and process. Only then spend the time to simplify or optimize the code. So your first go at a piece of code should be highly unoptimized. Because you have no idea what you're going to be limited by. You don't know if you're going to be limited by, CPU, RAM, or network. You have no idea. And then after you kind of simplify, optimize, then accelerate your cycle time. So be able to deliver faster, because that allows you to make more mistakes. If you can react to it very quickly, you can go faster. And then And then finally, once you have this thing going on, automate, because at that point, you know what you're automating. I mean, automating is hard, difficult, complicated. Sometimes automating a pipeline can be even more complicated than the code base itself. So yeah, that's like the 5 steps to getting things done, by Elon Musk, which I thought was a pretty interesting way of looking at things.
I worked with somebody in the past who had coined the phrase, or I don't know if he came up with it or where it originally came from, but it stuck with me. And it was premature optimization. And that was to try and optimize before you've actually made sure that something works. Make it work, because it's more important that something works than it work fast. So again, that goes back to the idea of TDD, because then you can get to the point that it works, and then maybe a test you add is for efficiency. Is it working as quickly as I need it to? And that could be a later requirement after the functionality.
And also in terms of efficiency, you really got to look at how often is this thing going to be used and by how many people, because that's a huge mistake I see. Sometimes developers spend so much time optimizing these like admin dashboards and panels and stuff like that, only to realize this is going to be used like once a month, maybe by like 2 people. Whereas, other parts of the application where it's like this giant form that's doesn't have good UX is used by 10,000 people, like 100,000 times a day or something like that. So it's really important to focus, shift engineering energy, resources, and attention to making that form entry the best it can be, and yes, deliver a crappy dashboard to the CEO, because CEO can deal with it, whereas the important part of the impact we're delivering is to the user base here.
Yeah, there's also the other factor is this long running thing synchronous or asynchronous? Is it blocking somebody from doing something?
Yeah.
Hey, if it takes you 30 seconds to make a save to a database table, I really don't care, because I can deal with that on the front end to say, hey, if that data call is taking 30 seconds, okay, that's fine. I can optimize and do other things on the front end, and the user can keep doing things without necessarily needing to know that.
Yep, exactly. Communicating with the user via spinners with descriptive text can solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
What's crazy
it's
is that
you, it's me.
What's crazy is that we talk about, how do we write minimal code? How do we write less code? But the answer is not just 1 or 2 things, right? It's all of these things that we talked about. It's learning and understanding all of these things and improving your ability as a developer to comprehend and be thinking about these things as you're solving problems. That will lead you to have the ability to understand how to write minimal code, right? At least that's what I feel. Because it's all these things that come into play, right? When we're talking about shipping software, and it's not only the thing that we're focusing on as developers of what we're writing specifically to solve that problem, but it's all these business requirements, all these customer interactions. Everything plays a key into how we should sculpt and mold our code that we send out the door, right? And then live with that over years and years and years, and keep maintaining it.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we better wrap it up. Any last final things that you wanted to point out, or do we cover everything? We're pretty good.
Yeah, I think we went over and more of what I wanted to say. So thank you for
Awesome.
for the time.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's do some picks real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. Our panelists, do you have any picks? No, nothing for Alyssa. Mike, you got any? Mike's got one. Okay, Mike.
I do.
What do you got?
The 5th part of a show on Netflix called Money Heist, or also by its Spanish name where it was originally filmed, Casa de Papel, as if I pretend that I know Spanish, is releasing early next month. So if you haven't checked out the first 4 seasons, go ahead and check it out. It's a pretty good show. I enjoy it.
Nice. I haven't watched that one yet, but it's on my list, so I guess I'll have to start. But that's a lot of seasons to catch up on. There's seasons, or are they just parts?
There's seasons that are called parts. There's I think about 10 per apart, and I think they're about an hour a piece.
All right. Cool. I have a pick today, and I'm going to pick the Firefox Dev Edition browser. I've been using that a lot lately. There's just, it's kind of like all the dev tools that we get in Chrome, but then enhanced even further. So there's a lot of niceties that I like in there.
Oh,
So just little things like the network tab when you're investigating traffic, it's a little bit easier to see like the request and the response versus like having to go to the main tab and scroll down to see the request, stuff like that. So check it out would be my recommendation as a front-end developer. It's pretty handy. All right, Doguhan, do you have any picks for us?
Yeah, so I'll be at the Reliable Web Summit that's happening at the end of this month. I guess my talk is going to be on the 27th, I believe, or maybe the 26th. Who knows these things? It'll be on crafting reliable and testable code with TypeScript. So if you're interested in just writing reliable and testable code with TypeScript, definitely check out my talk and the conference. Yeah, that's my pick.
Awesome. Oh, Mike. What? Yes, Mike.
I was reminded of another pick. Apparently, there's a new keyboard shortcut added to GitHub. If you are in a repo and you press the period, it will open that code base in an instance of VS Code in your browser. I haven't checked it out, but it sounds amazing to be able to just navigate a code base. Yup.
I just did it and it worked.
yeah.
Nice.
So if you want to go look at all of Alyssa's code in VS Code in the browser,
Great. Pull request accepted. Yes.
There we go. Good pick. All right. Hey, Doguhan, thanks a ton for sharing your time, sharing this knowledge. Really appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. That's a wrap. Have a good one. See you guys next time. Later.